Acts chapter 19, verse 13. Then some of the itinerant Jewish Jewish exorcists undertook to pronounce the name of the Lord Jesus over those who had evil spirits, saying, I adjure you by the Jesus whom Paul preaches. So these Jews are people who do not believe in Jesus, but they're seeing that Paul is having success in his exorcisms, and so they're trying to follow and do what Paul does. Verse 14, 7 sons of a Jewish high priest named Sceva were doing this. But the evil spirit answered them, Jesus I know, and Paul I know, but who are you? And the man in whom the evil spirit was leaped on them, mastered all of them, and overpowered them, so that they fled out of that house naked and wounded. And this became known to all residents of Ephesus, both Jews and Greeks, and fear fell upon them all, and the name of the Lord Jesus was extolled. Many also of those who were now believers came, confessing and divulging their practices. And a number of those who practiced magic arts brought their books together and burned them in the sight of all. And they counted the value of them and found it came to 50,000 pieces of silver. So the word of the Lord grew and prevailed mightily. So when the Gentiles are converting to Christianity, they have to shake off their Gentile ways. They have to shake off their Gentile worldview, and that can be a long, ongoing process. And so very prevalent for these Gentiles, is sorcery, going and finding, your prostitutes at the temple of Aphrodite in town, going out to eat at the temple of Zeus, getting like a steak from the temple of Zeus and participating in a pagan sacrifice. And more on that once we go through 1 Corinthians on the pagan worldview in regards to temple sacrifices. Verse 21. Now after these events, Paul resolved in the Spirit to pass through Macedonia and Achaia and go to Jerusalem, saying, After I have been there, I must also see Rome. And having sent into Macedonia 2 of his helpers, Timothy and Erastus, he himself stayed in Asia for a while. About that time, there arose no little stir concerning the way. For a man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who had made silver shrines of Artemis, brought no little business to the craftsmen. These he gathered together with the workmen of like occupation, said, Men, you know that from this business we have our wealth, making pagan idols. And you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but almost throughout all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a considerable company of people, saying that gods made with hands are not gods. And there is danger not only that this trade of ours may come into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis may count for nothing, and that she may even be deposed from her magnificence, she whom all Asia and the world worship. When they heard this, they were enraged, and cried out, Great is Artemis of the Ephesians! So the city was filled with the confusion, and they rushed together into the theater, dragging with them Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, who are Paul's companions in travel. Paul wished to go in among the crowd, but the disciples would not let him. Some of the Asiarchs also, who were friends of his, sent to him and begged him not to venture into the theater. Now some cried one thing, some another, for the assembly was in confusion, and most of them did not know why they had come together. Some of the crowd prompted Alexander, whom the Jews had put forward, and Alexander motioned with his hand, wishing to make a defense to his people. But when they recognized that he was a Jew, for about 2 hours they all with one voice cried out, Great is Artemis of the Ephesians! And when the town clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, Men of Ephesus, what man is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple keeper of the great Artemis and of the sacred stone that fell from the sky. Seeing then that these things cannot be contradicted, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rash. For you have brought these men here who are neither sacrilegious nor blasphemers of our goddess. If therefore Demetrius and the craftsmen with him have a complaint against anyone, the courts are open, and there are proconsuls, but let them bring charges against one another. But if you seek anything further, it shall be settled in the regular assembly. For we are in danger of being charged with rioting today, there being no cause that we can give to justify this commotion. And when he had said this, he dismissed the assembly. So the image we get of the pagans is they don't even know why they get together. Probably under demonic sway. If they're going out and shouting, "Great is Artemis," right? Who is a Greek goddess, I believe, of the hearth, maybe of hunting. I can't remember off the top of my head. And behind all these Greek gods, the personalities of these gods and these cults are demonic influences. And so the fact they're going out and chanting the praise of a god and their cult would suggest that there's some demonic influence behind the loss of reason and the irrationality behind this roaring babble. Okay, and notice that it began with the gospel threatening the economic security of these demon worshippers. And so you could also expect something similar to ever happen if the preaching of the gospel intrudes upon the economics of demon worship. Then most likely you're going to get very threatening resistance and irrationality in babbling crowds. All right, so if the gospel is truly to become planted in our country, and say you would have things like abortion or pornography become illegal, then you can expect a similar reaction to those things, those evil practices, all right, that are most definitely under demonic influence. Just ask any exorcist if they are, and you'll find out that they most assuredly are. You can expect irrational riots with no sense behind them being driven, okay, which is what you actually do see with some of these people who defend these practices, okay, and they defend these practices because there's a threat, right, of the gospel to remove the economics behind it, and then just also to remove the demonic cult from the country.